How did the socio-political landscape of innovation change?
Well, after the 2008 crisis, we had a double effect. On one side, the reduction of the available budget for the public administration, and on the other side, the increase of demand from the citizens and from the community. And so this double effect in practice reduced the role of the public administration, of public authorities. And this opened a new space of activity for the philanthropic institutions, and at the same time a huge responsibility on their shoulders. And we must, as philanthropic institutions, be aware that the available budget for the philanthropic institution with respect to the public budget is not comparable. And so this brought the philanthropy to think about their own role and their approach to the community. And this moved a lot the traditional way the philanthropic institution has acted in the past. And thinking about the banking origin foundations in Italy, which are the biggest in our country, we had also a kind of attack from the politics to the independence of these institutions. There was an attempt in the early year 2000 to bring back the grants and the endowments, most of all of the philanthropic foundations, under the public control. And this forced the foundation to reinvent themselves and to think about an added value they could bring to the community beyond the pure distribution of money. And after a lot of debate and study, this added value was identified in the innovation area, because innovation is kind of task which is difficult to be performed by the public authorities, and at the same time it's not easy to create innovation in the social area by private companies. So there was a space in the middle, and the foundation were the right players to fill that space.
Okay. Currently, we talk about strategic philanthropy. Can you explain this perspective?
Yes, I would respond. I would answer with two different items. The first is about the role of foundations and the activities they perform, and the other is about the investment side of their endowment. So, as for their role and the activity they can play in the innovation field through their grants and their projects, in the early 2000, the approach was to play like a scientific role. Doing experiments in a smaller scale, testing them, evaluate them in a rigorous way, and then whether they proved to be efficient and effective, to pass this new model of intervention to the public authority which is in charge for that kind of service. So there were these 4 steps, but after the crisis in particular, we understood that the 4th step did not take place in reality, because for 2 reasons mainly. The first is that the social change and social innovation is not only a complicated task, but it's a complex one. I mean, people are involved in it. And so it's not enough to replicate the same recipe, the same model you have tested in one place in another place, because you have the final beneficiaries which change, you have the managers, the public managers and the public operators which change, you have the political level, and so in my view, the social change must be looked after. You have to dirty your hands as a foundation, as a philanthropic institution, in order to make innovation become really change in society. So this is the strategic reason why the fourth step was not easy to perform. The other reason is that is about the cost of innovation, because whenever you change a process which is established for many years, you face additional costs in the short term, and eventually you will have a reduction of cost in the mid-term. But this perspective is not easy to be managed by the public managers, because they are they have a strong pressure on their budget year by year, and so it's not easy for them to take risks in the future. So that's why, in my opinion, the role of foundations in what we call the strategic philanthropy is to be active also in the gathering of the resources which are necessary for, let's say, a diffusion of a project or for the extension to a wider population. I will provide some examples also on this area if we have time. So that's why, for example, let's take an example of what we have called at the foundation. I'm the director of the Vela project. Vela means sail, and it's a project about the independent life for people with intellectual disability. So that's a kind of project which is very complex, because we work both on the newborn children, and also to young adults who are struggling to find a job, to find an independent life. And for example, it was very difficult for us as a project to find a proper job for these young adults, even if we had found a matching with a company which was available to host that person, because there were medical declarations that that person was not able to perform a job maybe 5 years before, or some other kind of authorization issues which were maybe formal but very difficult to let's say, to resolve. And that's why in that project we have experienced the need to strongly involve all of the public authorities and public agencies which are in charge for that kind of processes, because we can bring them innovation, but we have to work side by side with them in order to make innovation become a real change in the real processes. That's a kind of task which is maybe new, but it's to me it's the perspective. So foundations now in the strategic philanthropy framework have to think about strategy, have to invent or to co-invent with other players new solutions, but they have also to work on the ground to make them become change. And then there is another huge area of innovation, which is typical of the strategic philanthropy, which is the impact investing. I mean, blending the grants and the projects side, which is the traditional way of intervention, with the investment of the endowment to provide some positive social impact on the community. And that's a new challenge we are facing.
Yeah. What are the main targets of strategic philanthropy?
Well, first of all, you have to make a strong planning activity, a strategic planning activity. And I mean 3 to 5 years plans where you decide, which is both the technical and the political decision, which are the priority for your community and for your organization. So in our strategic plans, we choose the sectors where we want to be active, the subsectors which are more detailed, and for each of them we identify the objectives we want to reach. This is not an academic exercise, but it's necessary in order to be able to evaluate in the mid-term or long-term the results and the outcome of our activity. If you have identified the objectives, you are able to identify whether you have reached them or not. And also, having focused on the objectives, you are also able to make choices about, for example, the request that comes from the territory, because you have, let's say, a guide, you have the possibility to choose those projects which are more effective to reach those objectives. So this is a very important task, and every foundation has also to make some political decision on this, because we must be aware that we cannot do everything, and so whenever you decide on a certain sector to act on some fields and not on other, you make a political decision, which must somehow also be shared with the local stakeholders. And so this is a general answer, but then thinking about the targets of these strategic philanthropy plans, I must say that in general, activating the local community is a strategy which is almost necessary, because we have reached let's say, the awareness that we have many resources, but they are nothing with respect to the needs. And so we really need to be, let's say, activators of external energies and external resources. So we have to mobilize the citizens, we have to mobilize the local companies, enterprises. We have to support the local organization, the third sector, to obtain also grants from the European Commission, and we are active also, for example, on this side. We have to stimulate the donors, even individuals which are maybe available for donations. So the foundation's role is changing a bit. We cannot rely only on our own resources. That's my view. We have to mobilize also external resources for the good of our community. So this is our
Thanks.
goal.
Thanks. What are the future challenges and your expectation for your action in strategic philanthropy?
I mean, probably I've already answered a bit to this question, but I will summarize this way. There is one strategic goal, which is also a challenge, which is this blending of grants and equity investments in terms of creating impact investments. Impact investments also is related to the development of the social enterprises ecosystem in your territory, because impact investment often is focused on social enterprises. So, to me, to help social enterprises to increase their number, to increase their size, to create startups, and to accelerate their capability to be able to work in the marketplace is one of the strategic challenges for foundations. Social enterprises are the way to complete the welfare system in a certain community. I mean, in my view, the welfare system must be under the public responsibility for the core services, and there's no alternative for that. But there's a huge space around these core services which are related to the well-being of citizens. Let's think, for example, to the aging population and all of the services they need today and they will need in the future. There's a lot of space for the development of social enterprises. And so, being able, as foundations, both to invest in these social enterprises and to attract specialized investment funds from everywhere. Also the European Commission through the European Investment Bank is very active in supporting the investment in social enterprises, is one of the tasks of the challenges for us. And then what I was anticipating before, being able as foundation to attract additional resources to the territory and to mobilize the local energies, especially in the third sector, which has to be seen not only as a provider of services but also as an innovator itself.